So, you want to get good at sieges? For example, in the early game, where you fill up your party to take your first fief, or in the late game where you gather an army and besiege castle after town to destroy a faction. Sieges are essential to get good at if you want to succeed in this game. So how do you get good at sieges? We will go over every step in great detail to upgrade your siege game to the next level. Hi there, I am the Brass Helmet, and yes, my voice is a bit different. It's my apologies, I am a bit sick, so my voice is gone. Anyways, we are here to talk about sieges, so let's dive in. I like to divide every siege into 3 or 4 main phases. It depends if the defenders fall back into the keep. First, we have the building phase where both sides prepare their siege engines and sometimes bombard each other. Then comes the approach where the attacking army marches towards the walls. After that, the fighting begins on the walls and at the gate. And then finally, if the enemies retreat inside, you have to assault the keep. Let's go over each phase step by step. So first, the building phase. You'll want a solid engineer or high engineering skill, plenty of food, and a strong army composition. We'll talk more about that later. Also, make sure you have enough influence to raise army cohesion if necessary. First things first, I recommend always starting with a battering ram and at least 1 siege tower. Why? Because if an enemy army shows up while you're preparing, you can launch the siege early and still have a decent chance to win. You can slip inside the enemy's town castle for cover. Most of the time, they'll back off. If you start with building trebuchets, you will be in trouble when the enemy forces an early siege start. Besieging with just ladders is a death sentence, so make sure you have the ram and towers first. So once your ram and towers are ready, you face a decision. Do you starve the defenders? Do you destroy their ballistae and catapults? Or do you storm the walls with their defenses still standing? Let's go through the options. Starving out a settlement is one of the simplest siege tactics, but it doesn't always finish the job. Even when the garrison starts deserting, militia and AI lords inside the walls often carry their own supplies. Starvation isn't just about waiting, it's economic warfare. When you cut a city off from its lifeblood, villages can't deliver grain, caravans avoid the gates, and enemy lords are trapped inside. So, when should you starve out a town or city? If the enemy faction is already struggling and you've just crushed one of their armies, their pressure on the map will be low. That gives you time to starve a settlement and reduce your own casualties when you finally storm the walls. But beware, you don't want the enemy raiding your villages and snatching castles while you're camped outside waiting for a town's food to run dry. Always check the state of the map and the enemy's food supplies before committing. Starvation also works well if the enemy has a large army holed up inside. By besieging them, you lock that force in place, relieving pressure on your allies and giving them freedom to run wild across the map. This works best when your faction is stronger overall. Just remember, if that army is too big, they might sally out and crush you instead. In short, look at the map, weigh your resources, and choose starvation only when the situation favors you. It's all about tempo. You can choose to start bombarding the enemy. Trebuchets are the strongest siege engines in the game. They have a lot of health, and a single shot can one-hit an enemy ballista or catapult. But they also take the longest to build. A decent strategy is to construct them, immediately move them to reserve so the defenders can't destroy them, and then deploy several at once to overwhelm enemy defenses. Pro tip: the cancel button turns into the move to reserve button only after the trebuchet is built. Press it too early and you'll actually scrap the engine. Duh. Trebuchets are devastating in the preparation phase, but have limited value once the battle itself begins. So they're best if you trust your soldiers to handle the walls after the gates fall on their own. But personally, I advise to build fire catapults. They're weaker than trebuchets, but with a good engineer they can still shred the enemy's defenses. More importantly, they are way more efficient during the battle. Aim them at the gaps where your siege towers will roll in, and they'll soften up those choke points so your soldiers can break through the walls more easily. Your soldiers do a decent job aiming them, so don't be scared to let them manage it while you help the front lines. Ballistae. I almost never build, except in one situation. If the enemy is constructing a catapult, you can sneak in a quick ballista build if you have an empty spot. In that case, they're worth more than leaving a slot empty. So, here's the short version. If you don't have a solid engineers, you can build trebuchets to cancel out their engines. But when you have the option, I would choose fire catapults almost every time. Of course, you can experiment with a mix of both to see what best fits your playstyle. Once your bombardment is done and your plan is in place, it's time to step onto the battlefield and begin the approach phase. At the start of the approach phase, you face one last decision before the battle begins. Do you lead the assault yourself, or press that tempting "Send Troops" button? Most of the time, it's better to fight the battle personally. But I get it. In the late game, when you've already fought dozens of sieges, sometimes you just want to speed things up. So let's go over how auto-resolve really works and how to prepare for it. When you press "Send Troops", the game doesn't just skip the fight. Behind the scenes, it runs a formula to determine the outcome based on the army's combat power. First, it looks at troop quality. Higher-tier soldiers contribute far more to your combat power than recruits. 10 elite cavalry can outweigh 50 peasants because the system heavily favors experience and equipment. Next, it considers the commander's tactics skill. If you've invested in tactics, your army gets a hidden advantage. But remember, enemy lords have tactics too. Fight a seasoned commander in auto-resolve, and your losses might pile up fast. Then there's troop composition, and this part is critical for sieges. Archers suffer a heavy penalty, cavalry get a medium penalty, and horse archers take the worst penalty of all when attacking fortified walls. In other words, auto-resolve punishes ranged troops. If you know you'll be relying on "Send Troops", it's better to stack your army with high-tier infantry. Just be careful. Marching around with only infantry can leave you vulnerable if you're caught in the open field before the siege begins. Once the fight is resolved, the game distributes casualties. Low-tier troops are the first to die, while high-tier soldiers usually just end up wounded. Heroes, like your companions or allied lords, almost always walk away injured rather than dead. Finally, the winner is decided by which side has the higher overall combat power after everything is weighed. But here's the catch. Auto-resolve doesn't care about smart tactics, clever flanks, or your personal skill. That's why "Send Troops" almost always results in heavier losses than if you led the assault yourself. Now that we're marching toward the walls, it's important to bring the right troops with you. You'll want some good archers to soften up the defenders on the battlements. Battanian Fian champions or Valandian sharpshooters are excellent choices because, once their arrows are gone, they can still hold their own in melee. But don't bring too many. Balance is key. Strong infantry is essential. I recommend units with shields and throwing weapons, like Battanian wildlings. Order these troops to accompany your siege towers, not the battering ram. Once the towers reach the walls, they can unleash volleys of javelins to soften the enemy infantry guarding the entrances before climbing up. Keep them away from the ram, though. They'll often waste their shots trying to hit defenders inside the gatehouse, where they rarely land a hit. For the soldiers manning the battering ram, bring solid heavy infantry who can push through a shield wall and hold the breach. Units like Valandian sergeants or Imperial legionaries. As for cavalry, I recommend leaving most of them behind. Long lances and cavalry weapons are clumsy in tight corridors and on the walls. Infantry will serve you far better in siege combat. And don't forget commanders. Assign captains to each formation who give the best bonuses to that unit type. Just hover over them and check how many buffs they provide. This can make the difference between breaking the gate or being broken on it. Now the real battle begins. Personally, I like to start by taking control of one of the siege engines and raining destruction on the largest groups of defenders I can find. Park your horse nearby. Just make sure it doesn't get shot or it'll panic and run off. Then fire a few volleys with the catapult. Once the towers close in on the walls, mount up and ride to help your troops storm the battlements. If you don't have a siege engine, shift your focus to hitting enemy soldiers manning the artillery or thinning out their archers. And if you don't have a ranged weapon at all, well, then your job is simply to be the loudest cheerleader on the field. This is the deadliest phase of the entire siege. Your infantry will suffer massive casualties if left on their own. That's why your presence here is critical. A single well-timed intervention, cutting down defenders at a tower entrance, clearing archers off the walls, or distracting enemies at the gatehouse, can save dozens of your soldiers and turn the tide. And here's my golden rule. Always prioritize helping your siege towers over your battering ram. Towers often breach the walls earlier, and if you're fast, you can push through, rush the gatehouse, and stop defenders from dropping rocks on your soldiers below. Better yet, you can turn those very same rocks against them. Catch. Another tactic, useful when you've only got one siege tower and you're confident in your troops, is to take the walls first using the pair of ladders. Here's the step-by-step approach. Put a small group of archers close to the ladder site so they can suppress the defenders on the wall while you move. Interact with the siege ladders. Your units will automatically follow you up. Race the defenders. Sometimes your men make it onto the battlements before the enemy infantry arrives. If that happens, push quickly to the gatehouse to secure the entrance and support your forces there. Just be careful of archers on the ground. You will get peppered if you are the only target in reach for them. Warning, this is a riskier maneuver. If the defenders reach the ladders at the same time, or if your archers get suppressed, your infantry on the wall can be isolated and slaughtered. Only attempt this with reliable troops. But what if the walls are already breached? I usually order my infantry to hold position and let the siege engines do their work. Defenders often pile up around the breaches, forming perfect targets for artillery. A few well-placed shots can shatter entire clusters of enemy troops before the real fighting begins. When the defenders are softened up, that's when I unleash the infantry. A full charge into an already wounded enemy line can overwhelm them quickly. If you want to add even more pressure, have your archers pepper the breach with arrows before sending your men in. Once the defenders outside the walls are crushed, the battle is usually yours. But sometimes it isn't over. The surviving enemy retreats deeper, locking themselves in the keep. And that's where the final, most desperate stage of the siege begins. Inside the keep, elite infantry are king. Bring soldiers with heavy armor, shields, and strong melee weapons. They'll decide the battle in these close quarters. Avoid archers and cavalry altogether. The rooms are too cramped for ranged fire, and horses aren't allowed inside. Your own loadout matters too. Defenders often line the corridors with archers, so always carry a shield. A one-handed weapon paired with mobility is the safest choice. Two-handed weapons can work if you're confident, but in the narrow halls, you'll often end up clipping walls. When the clash begins, let your infantry absorb the first hit, then look for openings. Even one well-timed flank, slipping around the side of a shield wall, can unravel their formation and turn the tide. And really, that's all there is to it. The keep fight is brutal, fast, and unforgiving. But with heavy infantry, a solid shield, and smart positioning, victory is yours. And that's the full breakdown of how to master sieges in Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. From the first preparations to the final push inside the keep, you now have the tools to crush your enemies and claim their castles for yourself. Now I want to hear from you. Are there some siege tactics that I missed? Drop your tactics in the comments below. I'll be reading them. If you found this guide helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next deep dive. More battles, more strategy, and of course, more history are on the way. Until then, this has been the Brass Helmet. Good luck with your sieges, and I'll see you later.